It did not begin with a gunshot, nor with soldiers marching into a city. It began with silence, a silence broken by a single piece of paper. On the first day of August, the United States government announced a 50% tariff on Burkina Faso's most precious export shea butter. With one decree, Washington branded the labor of over 160,000 women unworthy. No consultation, no warning, no respect. For many, this was just economics. For President Ibrahim Traoré, it was war, not with bombs, but with policies designed to starve a nation. They expected him to bend. They expected Burkina Faso to break, but Traoré did not bow. He stood, declaring to the world, "They will not break us by starving our people." His words were not mere defiance, they were the sound of Africa refusing silence. And so the question rises, can one small nation, long overlooked, turn an act of economic aggression into the birth of sovereignty? Can Africa's red earth, cracked and scarred, become the soil of independence? Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Subscribe and walk with us for an Africa that never bows again. It began as a whisper in Washington, a document drafted far from the red soil of Africa. By the time the decree was signed, the damage had already been done. On the first day of August, Burkina Faso awoke to find its lifeline severed. A 50% tariff had been placed on its shea butter, the gold of its women, the essence of its culture, the quiet backbone of its economy. For more than 2 decades, this butter had traveled across oceans, filling jars and bottles in Paris, New York, and Los Angeles. It had carried the fingerprints of women who cracked nuts under the sun, their hands darkened by labor yet glowing with dignity. 160,000 women fed their families through this trade. And yet, with the stroke of a foreign pen, their livelihood was branded unworthy. The news spread like wildfire. In the town of Bulsa, women sat in silence beneath neem trees, unsure if tomorrow would bring food or hunger. In Bobo Dioulasso, trucks filled with barrels of unrefined butter idled for days, their drivers unpaid, their engines cooled by despair. At the cooperatives of Kaya, leaders whispered to their members, "Wait, do not panic, but know this, we have been attacked." Washington called it economics. President Ibrahim Traoré called it what it truly was, economic warfare. A war not fought with rifles, but with policies that cut deeper than bullets. It was a war against women, against farmers, against dignity itself. Factories halted procurement. Export managers made frantic calls to partners in Missouri, Florida, Texas, only to find silence on the other end. American distributors vanished overnight, too afraid of sanctions to pick up the phone. In less than 48 hours, haulage volumes dropped by 32%. Warehouses closed their gates. The hum of industry stopped, and then came the human cost. Clarissa Woodson, a store owner in Chicago, looked at empty shelves and sighed. 3 months now. No Shea again. In Miami, a small skincare founder whispered that she was sealing shipping boxes by hand, trying to cut costs before rent destroyed her dream. Across Brooklyn and Los Angeles, boutique beauty shops let off staff, suspended orders, and closed their doors. What Washington had intended as a chess move became a dagger through the heart of working people both in Africa and in America. Yet amidst the despair, voice arose. Solamoto Konate, a cooperative leader in Kaya, gathered her women and spoke with fire in her eyes. "They think we are only exporters, but we are mothers. We are fighters." Her words carried across villages, across radio stations, across a continent weary of humiliation. What the West saw as leverage, Burkina Faso felt as betrayal. It was not the first betrayal, nor would it be the last. For generations, Africa's resources had been taken cheap, repackaged abroad, and sold back at a price too high for its own children. The Shea tariff was not just an economic decree, it was a reminder that the chains of dependency had never been broken, they had only changed form. But this time, something was different. This time, the people of Burkina Faso had a leader who refused to kneel. When the decree reached Ouagadougou, many expected panic. They expected meetings filled with fear, with ministers whispering of collapse. But inside the presidential palace, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier who became a statesman, sat upright, his voice steady, his eyes unyielding. He called his council together, not to mourn, but to declare war, not the war of weapons, but the war of words, contracts, and sovereignty. He stood before them and spoke with a clarity that cut through despair. They will not break us by starving our people. Those words spread like sparks across the dry fields of Burkina Faso. They reached the villages where women churned shea by hand. They echoed in the warehouses where drivers slept in their idle trucks. They reached the ears of students, farmers, and soldiers who had grown weary of being told that their nation's fate must be written elsewhere. For the women of Kaya, those words were not politics, they were survival. For the farmers of Kenedougou, they were a promise that their harvest would not rot in silence. For the traders of Bobo Dioulasso, they were proof that their labor was not forgotten. Traoré did not beg for mercy. He did not send envoys to Washington, pleading for reconsideration. Instead, he named the policy for what it was: economic warfare. He told his people, they tax not just our butter, but our heritage. They tax the very hands of our women. It was a speech that would later be quoted across Africa, replayed in Nairobi, studied in Johannesburg, admired in Accra. It was not simply an Ibrahim Traoré speech, it was a declaration of dignity. The old order expected silence, but instead, the young president roared. He announced an emergency program to support cooperatives. Funds were redirected to local unions. Transport corridors were prioritized for repair, and storage facilities were opened under government protection. His government did not wait for foreign aid. It acted with African sovereignty, proving that a nation could defend its people without asking permission. In Nairobi, headlines read, Burkina Faso refuses to bow. In Mumbai, traders debated whether Africa had just opened a new chapter in commodity independence. In Dubai, analysts noted the spike in the London Shea Futures Index, up 11% in just days. As global markets scrambled to adjust, but within Burkina Faso, the message was simpler. It was about survival with dignity. It was about mothers like AWA, who told her daughters, do not fear. The president has spoken. It was about elders who nodded silently. Remembering the speeches of Thomas Sankara, seeing in Traoré the same fire that once lit the Sahel, the West may have underestimated him, dismissing him as just another military leader. But to his people, President Ibrahim Traoré was becoming something more: the voice of defiance, the embodiment of Pan Africanism, the captain who turned fear into resolve. He did not speak only of butter. He spoke of power. He reminded his nation that Africa has always been more than a source of raw material. When we control the first mile and the last word, we control the story, he said. And that story, for the first time in generations, was being written by African hands. Traoré's defiance was not anger alone. It was strategy. He reminded his ministers that survival without sovereignty was no survival at all. He told them, we do not wait for charity. We build, we defend, we lead. His words transformed grief into grit, despair into determination. And so, while Washington expected Burkina Faso to falter, the nation stood taller. It was no longer just about shea butter. It was about reclaiming the right to decide. The world thought Burkina Faso would plead for mercy. They expected letters of appeal to Washington, quiet concessions to Paris. And another African leader bowing before foreign capitals, but Traoré did not bow. It pivoted. On the morning of August 4th, as the sun rose over Ouagadougou, he signed a trade agreement worth $2.1 billion with China. The news traveled across the continent like thunder. Burkina Faso had just redefined the rules. This was not aid. It was not a loan wrapped in hidden chains. It was trade clean, direct, and unapologetic. 128 Chinese companies received import licenses, 5 years. No quotas, no debts. In exchange, Burkina Faso demanded what no Western power had ever offered: infrastructure, processing plants, solar dryers, and technology transfers. For decades, the nation had shipped raw shea butter abroad, only to buy it back in luxury jars for hundreds of dollars. Now, that cycle was broken. Factories began rising in Shenzhen, Tianjin, and Nanjing, built not to exploit Africa, but to refine and brand Burkina Faso's butter with respect. Women who once cracked nuts barefoot now scanned shipping manifests, their voices echoing in Mandarin as they negotiated directly with buyers. At last, the labor of their hands carried not just fatigue, but sovereignty. In Bobo-Dioulasso, the hills erupted with song. Women danced outside their cooperatives, ululating with joy. "It means we work tomorrow," said Ayo, adjusting her scarf, "and next week, and maybe next year." To them, this was not simply economics. It was survival restored. It was dignity reborn. In Addis Ababa, diplomats whispered of a new model: shea diplomacy. For the first time, Africa was not begging for inclusion, it was setting the terms. In Lagos, exporters hesitated, wondering if cocoa could follow the shea blueprint. In Dar es Salaam, designers proudly displayed cosmetics branded "from soil to sovereignty." But Traoré did not celebrate with parades. He stayed in his midnight office, poring over logistics maps, tracing routes eastward toward the port of Gwadar. He knew that sovereignty is not built on slogans, it is built on schedules, contracts, and the unbreakable spine of infrastructure, the Dori Tema Corridor. Once a pothole-ridden road, he was declared a national priority. Within weeks, transport delays fell by 40%. The impact reverberated beyond Burkina Faso. In Paris, officials who once assumed automatic access to African markets now faced rejection. In Washington, frustration brewed as American companies lost their sourcing advantage. What was once seen as a pawn on the global chessboard had become a rival. President Ibrahim Traore did not just strike a deal. He struck a blow against dependency. He declared that African nations were not reserves for others to exploit, but rivals capable of leading. His defiance was not isolationist. It was Pan Africanism reborn, the idea that African sovereignty must stand tall, united, and uncompromising. The West underestimated him, but the people of Africa and the diaspora watching from Atlanta, Chicago, Kingston, and Lagos recognized the shift. This was not charity. This was strategy. This was survival with dignity. And so, in the quiet corridors of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré redrew the map not just for Burkina Faso, but for a continent long denied its voice. The ink on the $2.1 billion agreement was barely dry when the ripple effects spread across the globe. What began as an embargo meant to weaken Burkina Faso instead shook the foundations of Western supply chains. In America, beauty companies scrambled, from Miami to Denver. Labs reformulated creams, desperate to replace Burkina Faso's unique shea butter with Ghanaian stock or synthetic substitutes. But customers noticed. Reviews flooded online. "This isn't real shea. Something's wrong." A mid-tier brand in Denver admitted its new formula felt greasy, unstable, Boutique owners from Brooklyn to Los Angeles whispered the same lament: the soul of the brand was gone. For multinational giants, the loss was manageable. They cut product lines, absorbed costs, and waited. But for small businesses, the Black-owned skincare shops in Chicago, the community brands in Atlanta, the hit was devastating. Margins vanished. Staff were laid off. Some doors closed forever. The American strategy, intended to assert dominance, had instead hurt its own people. Meanwhile, across Africa, the mood was different. Headlines in Nairobi read, "Burkina Faso refuses to break." Radio hosts in Lagos debated whether cocoa and palm oil could follow the Shea doctrine. In Accra, students painted murals declaring from soil to sovereignty. Across Johannesburg, poets invoked the names of women cracking nuts beneath the Sahel sun. Turning their labor into the symbol of a continent's pride, China moved quickly. Within weeks, 3 processing plants were under construction. Shipments flowed eastward through new Belt and Road corridors. Markets in Dhaka, Mumbai, and Dubai lit up with contracts, each stamped with Burkina Faso's new national emblem, women's gold. What was once a forgotten commodity now stood at the center of Africa news and global economic headlines. But the impact was not only economic, it was psychological. For decades, the narrative told Africa it could not build, could not lead, could not stand without Western permission. Traoré had shattered that story. For the first time, a landlocked nation dictated the terms of a multi-billion-dollar trade. Analysts at the African Development Bank called it seismic. One senior economist remarked, "They have gone from being exploited to being irreplaceable." In Washington, frustration grew. Officials spoke vaguely of national interest, but behind closed doors, they admitted miscalculation. The tariff, meant to weaken Traoré, had instead elevated him. He had not only shielded an industry, he had weaponized it into policy. Even in Europe, murmurs of regret surfaced. French envoys quietly bid for access to markets they once assumed were theirs by default. But the response in Ouagadougou was firm. Burkina Faso no longer pleaded. It negotiated as an equal. One West African diplomat said it plainly, "We used to ask, now we negotiate." This was the heart of the transformation. Burkina Faso latest news was no longer about terrorism, instability, or dependency. It was about strategy, pride, and sovereignty. Captain Ibrahim's latest news was not that of a desperate leader clinging to power. It was the story of a president who dared to build a framework where Africa was not an afterthought but a power broker. Across the African diaspora, especially among elders in America, the story resonated deeply. It echoed the struggles of their ancestors, who had labored in cotton fields and sugar plantations without dignity. Now, across the Atlantic, a new generation of Africans was saying no more. This was not charity. This was Pan Africanism reborn. In boardrooms from Nairobi to New York, executives spoke a word they once dismissed with a smirk: Burkina Faso. But now, they said it with caution, with respect, and with strategy. In the villages of Kenedougou, the air filled with song, women who once cracked nuts barefoot now stood in classrooms, learning how to scan shipping manifests, draft contracts, and negotiate in Mandarin. What was once survival had become sovereignty. Shea butter, long dismissed as just another raw material, had transformed into a banner of identity. At the Ministry of Education in Ouagadougou, new curriculum modules ask students, "What does sovereignty smell like?" A 12-year-old girl wrote, "It smells like the butter my grandmother makes." This was no longer economics. It was culture, history, and dignity woven together. Across Africa, the phrase "from soil to sovereignty" began to spread. Murals in Johannesburg showed women lifting barrels of butter toward rising suns. Poets in Dar es Salaam recited verses comparing cracked shells to national scars, now healed. Musicians released songs titled "Shea is Ours." What had started as a trade dispute had become an anthem for a continent. Even universities took note. In Accra, youth-led cooperatives rebranded their products with the phrase, "From Africa with Authority." In Addis Ababa, business schools taught the Shea doctrine as a case study in value chain control. Professors told their students, when Burkina Faso stopped exporting weakness, it began exporting power. The message was clear: sovereignty was no longer theoretical. It was visible in shipping slips, in contracts signed in local languages, in royalties paid directly to the women who stirred the paste that built an industry. This was not just about butter. It was about proving that African sovereignty could be built brick by brick, clause by clause, woman by woman. But the symbolism spread further. In Paris, customers demanded products labeled with traceable origins. In New York, bloggers exposed companies that tried to greenwash substitutions. Consumers began to ask a new question: where does dignity come from? And in that question lay the power of Burkina Faso's pivot. For the people of Ouagadougou, it meant more than profit. It meant walking into markets with pride, knowing their nation no longer begged for contracts but dictated them. One young exporter told a reporter, "We don't chase contracts anymore. They come to us." His words were painted on the walls of the National Business School as a mantra for the next generation. President Ibrahim Traore had not only rewritten trade agreements, he had redrawn Africa's imagination by embedding processing, technology transfers, and royalties into contracts. He created a blueprint. If butter could become a weapon of dignity, why not cocoa, cotton, or gold? If a landlocked nation could dictate the terms of commerce, why not the entire Sahel alliance? For many in the diaspora, elders in Atlanta, churchgoers in Detroit, community leaders in Kingston, the story felt familiar. It echoed the centuries-long struggle against exploitation, and for the first time, they saw an African leader, a soldier turned statesman, showing that resistance was not only possible but profitable. This was more than a deal. It was a doctrine. It was the rebirth of Pan Africanism, not through fiery speeches alone, but through contracts, shipments, and the steady hum of factories. It was dignity carved into every shipment leaving Burkina Faso. So let the question be asked across the globe: if Burkina Faso could turn butter into a symbol of power, what else could Africa transform? Coffee, cocoa, diamonds. Could the continent once dismissed as a supplier rise as a sovereign force? If you believe this is what Africa needed all along, say amen in the comments below. It began with a tariff, but it ended with a tremor that shook the old world order. What Washington meant as punishment became the spark of possibility. Burkina Faso, once dismissed, once silenced, had stood tall. And leading that stand was President Ibrahim Traoré, the captain who refused to let his people bow. This was more than a trade deal. It was a declaration that Africa would no longer be defined as raw material for someone else's wealth, that African sovereignty could be written not only in speeches, but in contracts, in shipping manifests, in the daily wages of women who once cracked nuts for pennies. The Ibrahim Traoré speech that called the tariff economic warfare will be remembered, not because of defiance alone, but because of what followed: action, structure, and vision. The Sahel Alliance, once a fragile idea, now finds strength in shared strategy. Pan Africanism, once a slogan, now breathes through every factory, every shipment. Every lesson taught in African schools. The world now reads Africa news with a different tone, no longer pity, but caution, no longer dismissal, but respect. Captain Ibrahim, latest news is not of desperation, but of determination. Burkina Faso, latest news is not of collapse, but of construction. And yet, this is only the beginning. The blueprint, born in Ouagadougou, challenges every African nation to ask: if butter can be sovereignty, why not cocoa? Why not cotton? Why not gold? If one landlocked nation can redraw the map, why not an entire continent? To the elders of the diaspora, to those who remember chains, plantations, and silence, this moment is proof. Proof that the prayers of our ancestors were not in vain. Proof that the dream of a free and sovereign Africa did not die with them, but rises with us. So if this story moved something in your chest, do not scroll past. Like, share, speak, subscribe, because they hid our history long enough. Let's speak our future out loud. Thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story, the kind they still don't want you to hear. New Africa. Africa rise. Africa can do it. It's time for Africa